My name is Isabella Chen. I'm 29 years old, and I've always believed that family comes first. Last year, I spent $45,000 of my hard-earned savings to plan my sister's dream wedding in Tokyo, a destination she'd talked about since we were kids. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that 3 weeks before the ceremony, my own sister would call to uninvite me from the wedding. I had entirely funded all to make room for her best friend, who needed this experience more than I did. If you're reading this, please let me know in the comments where you're from, and whether you've ever experienced family betrayal like this. Your support means everything to me as I share this painful but ultimately empowering journey. To understand why this betrayal cuts so deep, you need to know about my family's dynamics. I work as a senior software architect at a tech startup in San Francisco. After 7 years of 80-hour weeks and constant learning, I've finally achieved the financial freedom I dreamed of as a struggling college student. I own a beautiful condo in Pacific Heights, drive a Tesla Model S, and have a healthy investment portfolio. But more importantly, I've maintained my values, especially my commitment to family, even when that commitment hasn't always been reciprocated. My mother, Linda, is 58 and works as a high school art teacher. She's always been the creative soul of our family, encouraging my sister Emma's artistic pursuits, while sometimes overlooking my more technical achievements. Not maliciously, but art and creativity simply speak to her in ways that coding and algorithms never could. My father, David, is 61 and recently retired from his job as a municipal engineer. He's practical, methodical, and has always appreciated my logical approach to life. However, he's also been the primary enabler of my sister's more impulsive decisions, often stepping in to bail her out when her artistic ventures don't pan out financially. Then there's Emma, my 26-year-old sister. She's a freelance graphic designer and aspiring photographer who has always lived life on her own terms. While I was studying computer science and working internships, Emma was backpacking through Europe, taking art classes in Tuscany, and following her passion for visual storytelling. Don't get me wrong, I admire her creativity and free spirit. But Emma has also never quite grasped the concept of financial responsibility. She's the type of person who will spend her last $500 on a vintage camera lens while having no money for rent. Naturally, our parents, and increasingly, I have always been there to catch her when she falls. The pattern started in college. While I was living in a cramped dorm and surviving on ramen noodles to minimize my student loans, Emma convinced our parents to co-sign for an expensive art school in New York. When she graduated with $80,000 in debt and no job prospects, guess who helped her make loan payments while she found herself as an artist? When Emma decided to start her own design studio 2 years ago, I co-signed the business loan and helped her set up her office space. When her biggest client didn't pay their invoice and left her scrambling to cover rent, I quietly transferred money to her account. I never asked for recognition or even acknowledgement. That's just what family does, right? Last year, Emma started dating Marcus, a 28-year-old chef who owns a small farm-to-table restaurant in Berkeley. Marcus is everything Emma needed, stable, supportive, and completely smitten with her artistic vision. He brings out the best in her while gently encouraging more practical decision-making. When they got engaged 6 months ago, I was genuinely thrilled. Marcus was the first boyfriend who seemed to truly understand and complement Emma's personality. Their proposal story was perfectly them. He proposed in a sunflower field he'd planted specifically for the occasion, with a ring he'd designed himself using a vintage setting from his grandmother. The idea for a Tokyo wedding came from Emma's obsession with Japanese aesthetics and culture. Since high school, she'd filled her room with Japanese art books, studied origami, and dreamed of visiting the temples of Kyoto and the neon-lit streets of Shibuya. Bella imagined saying our vows under cherry blossoms, she said during one of our regular coffee dates, her eyes lighting up the way they always did when she talked about her dreams. Marcus and I could have the ceremony at a traditional temple, then celebrate at one of those incredible rooftop venues overlooking Tokyo Bay. The more she talked about it, the more magical it sounded. Emma described how she wanted to honor both her artistic vision and Marcus's culinary passion by incorporating traditional Japanese elements. A tea ceremony, kiseki-style dining, even kimono-inspired wedding attire designed by a local artisan. There was just one problem: the cost. A destination wedding in Tokyo for 30 guests would easily cost $50, $1,000, 60 soms, and that didn't include the flights and accommodations for our family and closest friends. Emma and Marcus, despite their love and compatibility, were barely making ends meet with their respective businesses. I watched my sister's face fall as she did the math, her dreams colliding with financial reality in the way they always seem to. "Maybe we could do something smaller here," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "A garden wedding in Napa might be nice too." But I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Emma had always given up her dreams when money became an issue, scaling back her ambitions to fit her budget. This time I decided would be different. What if I helped make it happen? I offered the words out of my mouth before I'd fully thought them through. Emma's head snapped up. "Bella, no! That's way too much money. You've already done so much for me." "Emma, you're my only sister. You get married once, hopefully," I added with a smile. "Let me give you the wedding you actually want, not the compromise version." What followed was the most detailed planning project I'd ever undertaken outside of work. I treated Emma's wedding like a major software deployment, creating spreadsheets, timelines, and contingency plans for every possible scenario. I researched Tokyo wedding venues for weeks, eventually finding the perfect combination: a traditional ceremony at Meiji Shrine, followed by a reception at a boutique hotel in Roppongi with panoramic city views. I arranged for a bilingual wedding planner, coordinated with local vendors for flowers and photography, and even found a designer who could create custom kimonos for the wedding party. The guest list included our immediate family, Emma and Marcus's closest friends, and Marcus's parents, who were flying in from Portland. I handled every detail: flights, hotel accommodations, restaurant reservations for the pre-wedding dinners, and even cultural experiences like a group visit to a traditional onsen spa. The total cost came to $47,000. It would wipe out most of my annual bonus and require me to dip into my emergency fund, but seeing Emma's face when I presented the completed plan made every sacrifice worth it. "I can't believe you did all this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she flipped through the beautiful presentation I'd created. "Bella, this is incredible. It's everything I dreamed of, and more." Marcus was equally overwhelmed. "Isabella, I don't know how we'll ever repay you for this. Just be happy," I told them. "That's all the payment I need." Emma's best friend Jessica had been a constant presence in our lives since high school. At 27, Jessica worked as a social media manager for various influencers and small businesses when she worked at all. She had a pattern of taking on projects, getting bored or overwhelmed, and moving on to the next shiny opportunity. Jessica was the type of person who always seemed to be in crisis. Her car would break down right before a big payment was due. Her landlord would suddenly raise her rent. Her clients would mysteriously stop paying their invoices. Emma, with her generous heart, was always the first to offer help, advice, or a couch to crash on. I'll admit, I'd never particularly liked Jessica. There was something calculating about her helplessness, a way she'd present her problems that made helping her feel like the only decent option. She had a talent for making her crises seem urgent and temporary, even though they followed a remarkably consistent pattern. When Emma announced her engagement, Jessica's reaction was enthusiastic, but tinged with something else: envy perhaps, or disappointment, that her friend was moving into a new phase of life without her. "A Tokyo wedding, that's so extra, Em," Jessica had said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I mean, it sounds amazing, but wow, the cost must be insane." When Emma explained that I was funding the entire wedding, Jessica's demeanor shifted noticeably. "Your sister is paying for everything." "That's incredibly generous. You're so lucky to have family with that kind of money." The way she said "that kind of money" made my skin crawl. It wasn't admiration or gratitude, it was assessment. Like she was calculating what my generosity might mean for her own future opportunities. Over the following months, as Emma and I planned every detail of the Tokyo wedding, Jessica began inserting herself into conversations and decisions, in increasingly obvious ways. She'd offer opinions on venue choices, suggest additions to the guest list, and hint at how much she'd love to experience Japanese culture someday. "I've been learning Japanese on Duolingo," she mentioned during one of Emma's planning sessions. "I'm actually getting pretty good at it. It would be so cool to practice with actual native speakers." "Maybe you should plan your own trip to Japan sometime," I suggested politely. "Oh, I could never afford something like that," Jessica replied with a pointed look. "Not everyone has a tech salary, you know." The passive-aggressive comments became more frequent as the wedding date approached. Jessica would make jokes about being too poor for destination weddings, or comment on how unfair it was that some people could afford international travel while others couldn't. Emma, ever the peacekeeper, began expressing guilt about having such an elaborate wedding when Jessica was struggling financially. "Maybe I should tone things down," she said during one of our planning calls. "Jess has been making comments about how extravagant everything is." "Emma, this is your wedding," I reminded her firmly. "You shouldn't feel guilty for accepting a gift, especially one you didn't ask for." But I could see Jessica's manipulation working. Emma's excitement about the wedding was being clouded by artificial guilt, and I suspected that was exactly what Jessica intended. 3 weeks before the Tokyo wedding, Emma called me on a Tuesday evening. I was working late at the office, finishing up a critical project before taking time off for the wedding. When I saw her name on my phone, I smiled, expecting another excited update about last-minute details. "Hey, bride-to-be," I answered cheerfully. "Please tell me you haven't decided to change the flower arrangements again." There was a long pause, and when Emma spoke, her voice was strained and careful. "Bella, we need to talk about the wedding." Something in her tone made my stomach drop. "What's wrong? Did something happen with the venue?" "No, nothing like that. Everything you planned is perfect. It's just..." Another pause. "We've had to make a really difficult decision." I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. "What kind of decision?" "Jessica has been going through a really rough time lately. Her landlord is evicting her. She lost her biggest client, and she's been really depressed about where her life is headed. She's been talking about how everyone around her is moving forward while she's stuck." I had a sinking feeling about where this conversation was headed, but I stayed quiet and let Emma continue. "She's never been out of the country, Bella. She's never had the opportunity to experience something like this. And seeing all my wedding planning knowing she can't afford to come with us, it's been really hard on her." "Emma," I said slowly, "are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Marcus and I have been talking, and we think it would be really meaningful if Jessica could take your place on the trip. You've traveled internationally before you went to London for that conference last year, and you've been to Europe. But for Jessica, this would be life-changing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped my phone so tightly, my knuckles turned white. "You want me to give up my place at your wedding, the wedding I paid for?" "Not give up," Emma said quickly. "We'd still want you there spiritually. You could video call into the ceremony, and we'd make sure to include you in all the photos and..." "Emma, stop." My voice was sharper than I'd ever used with her before. "Are you seriously asking me to stay home from your wedding so your friend can go to Tokyo instead?" I know how it sounds, but think about it from Jessica's perspective. She's never had opportunities like this. She's never had family who could afford to give her incredible experiences. This could be exactly what she needs to turn her life around. I stood up from my desk and began pacing my office. What about my perspective, Emma? What about the fact that I spent $47,000 and 6 months planning this wedding? What about the fact that I'm your sister? "You'll always be my sister," Emma said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "That's not going to change whether you're physically in Tokyo or not. But Jessica, she needs this Bella. She needs to know that people care about her, that she's worth investing in." "Then let her plan and pay for her own trip to Japan," I said flatly. "You know she can't afford that. And anyway, it wouldn't be the same. Being part of our wedding, being included in such an important moment, that's what would really mean something to her." I sat back down heavily in my chair. "Emma, I need you to think about what you're asking me. I've been planning this wedding for months. I've taken time off work. I've spent nearly $50,000 of my own money, and now you want me to just step aside? I know it's a big ask, Emma admitted. But you're successful, Bella. You can go to Japan anytime you want. You can afford to take amazing trips and have incredible experiences. Jessica can't. This might be her only chance. The casual dismissal of my sacrifices stung almost as much as the original request. You think I can just go to Japan anytime I want? Can't you? Emma asked, sounding genuinely confused. I mean, with your salary and everything. I realized in that moment that Emma had no idea what this wedding had cost me, not just financially, but emotionally. She saw my success and assumed it meant money was no object. Experiences were easily replaceable, and my participation in her wedding was somehow less valuable because I could theoretically afford to create my own special moments. Emma, when you decided to get married in Tokyo, how much did you think it would cost? I don't know. A lot. I never really looked into the specifics because I knew we couldn't afford it. $47,000, I said clearly. That's how much I've spent on your wedding. It's almost my entire annual bonus, plus a significant chunk of my savings. I've been eating lunch at my desk for months to save money. I postponed buying a new car because I put that money toward your wedding instead. There was silence on the other end of the line. I had no idea it was that much, Emma said quietly. I didn't want you to know because I wanted you to enjoy planning your dream wedding without feeling guilty. But Emma, this isn't just some casual vacation I can reschedule. This is your wedding, the biggest day of your life, and you're asking me to miss it so your friend can have a nice trip. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible, Emma said, and I could hear tears in her voice. It doesn't just sound terrible, Emma. It is terrible. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Emma spoke again, her voice stronger than before. I know you're right. I know this is completely unfair to you. But Bella, I've already told Jessica she could come. She's already applied for her passport, started planning what to pack. If you take it back now, she'll be disappointed, I finished. But if you don't take it back, you'll be betraying your sister who funded your entire wedding. I'm in an impossible situation, Emma said, starting to cry. No, you're not, I replied firmly. You're in a situation where you have to choose between doing the right thing and doing the easy thing. There's a difference. We talked for another hour with Emma, alternating between acknowledging how unfair her request was and explaining why Jessica's needs should take priority. By the end of the conversation, nothing had been resolved, but I could tell Emma had already made her decision. I need some time to think about this, I said finally, though I already knew what I had to do. Of course. Take all the time you need. And Bella, I'm sorry. I know this isn't fair to you. After we hung up, I sat in my empty office and cried, not just from hurt, but from the crushing realization that my sister saw me as a resource rather than a person. To Emma, I wasn't the sister who loved her enough to fund her dream wedding. I was the sister who had enough money that missing her own wedding wouldn't really matter. The next morning, I called my travel agent with a clear head and a firm resolve. Hiroshi, it's Isabella Chen. I need to make some significant changes to the Tokyo wedding booking. Of course, Isabella-san. What adjustments do you need? I need to cancel my participation in the trip entirely and restructure the remaining reservations accordingly. There was a pause. I'm sorry to hear that. May I ask if there's been a change in your family situation? You could say that. I also need to adjust the overall booking to reflect a more modest budget. What followed was the most satisfying hour I'd spent in months. I systematically downgraded every aspect of the wedding I'd planned, transforming the luxury experience into something more appropriate for someone who thought my presence was optional. The first-class flights became economy seats. The luxury hotel rooms became standard accommodations at a business hotel in a less convenient location. The private kaiseki dinner became a group meal at a mid-range restaurant. The professional photography package became basic coverage. The private transportation became public transit passes. Most importantly, I rerouted the money I'd been saving to fund an extended solo trip to Japan for myself, but timed for 2 weeks after Emma's wedding. I booked myself into a traditional ryokan in Kyoto. Arranged for private cultural experiences Emma had only dreamed of and planned to spend a month exploring the country at my own pace. Isabella-san, Hiroshi said carefully, these changes will significantly alter the wedding experience. Are you certain this is what you want? I'm absolutely certain, I replied. My family has made it clear that my presence isn't essential to their celebration. I'm simply adjusting the budget to reflect the actual value they place on the event. The new total cost for Emma's wedding, $12,000. The savings went toward my own Japan adventure, a month-long cultural immersion that would cost exactly $35,000. I didn't tell Emma about the changes immediately. Instead, I waited 3 days to see if she would call back to apologize and uninvite Jessica. When no such call came, I knew she'd made her final decision. On Friday evening, I called Emma back. I've been thinking about our conversation, I said without preamble. And I've decided you're right. Really? Emma's voice was bright with relief. Absolutely. Jessica deserves this opportunity more than I do. I hope she has an amazing time at your wedding. Oh, Bella, thank you so much. I knew you'd understand once you thought about it. You're the best sister anyone could ask for. I do have some news, though. I've made some adjustments to the wedding arrangements. What kind of adjustments? Well, since you've made it clear that the guest experience is more important than the actual details, I've simplified things considerably. You'll still have your Tokyo wedding, just not quite as elaborate as originally planned. I walked her through the changes matter-of-factly, the downgraded flights, the new hotel, the simplified reception, the reduced photography package. But what about the temple ceremony? Emma asked, her voice small. Still happening, just without the elaborate floral arrangements and traditional music ensemble I'd arranged. And the kaiseki dinner, replaced with a nice group meal. You'll still eat well, just not at a Michelin-starred restaurant. There was a long silence. Bella, these changes, they're pretty significant. Are they? I thought the most important thing was having the people you care about most present for your special day. All the rest is just details, right? Right, Emma said uncertainly. It's just, I had gotten excited about some of those details. I understand, but as you pointed out, I've spent quite a lot of money already. These adjustments will save about $35,000, which I've reallocated to other purposes. Other purposes? I'm taking my own trip to Japan, a month-long solo journey starting 2 weeks after your wedding. I'll be staying at traditional inns, studying with master craftspeople, and experiencing the cultural immersion you originally dreamed of. It should be incredible. The silence on Emma's end was deafening. You're going to Japan without me? She finally asked. Well, you made it clear that my presence at your Japan trip wasn't essential, so I planned my own. Bella, that's not... I never said your presence wasn't important. Emma, you literally asked me to stay home from your wedding so your friend could come instead. If that doesn't say my presence isn't important, I'm not sure what would. We talked for another 30 minutes with Emma, alternating between defending her decision and expressing regret about the downgraded wedding plans. Eventually, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Is there any way to change things back, to have both you and Jessica come? The bookings for 4 people have already been modified, I said truthfully. Adding another person at this point would be complicated and expensive. How expensive? About $25,000 to upgrade everything back and add a 5th person. Emma was quiet for a long moment. We can't afford that. I know. That's why I made the adjustments I did. You'll still have your dream wedding in Tokyo, just a more modest version. After we hung up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness that my relationship with Emma had come to this point. Anger that she'd put Jessica's wants above my feelings. But also, for the first time in years, a sense of empowerment. I had refused to be taken for granted. I had set boundaries and stuck to them. And I had prioritized my own needs instead of automatically sacrificing for someone who clearly didn't appreciate the sacrifice. The week following my conversation with Emma was filled with increasingly frantic phone calls from various family members as the reality of the situation sank in. My mother called first, her voice carefully neutral in the way it got when she was trying to mediate family conflicts. Bella, sweetheart, Emma told me about the changes to the wedding plans. I'm wondering if there might be some way to work things out." "What did Emma tell you exactly?" I asked. "She said you were upset about Jessica joining the trip, and that you'd made some adjustments to the bookings in response." I almost laughed at the sanitized version of events Emma had presented. "Mom, did Emma mentioned that she asked me to stay home from her wedding entirely so Jessica could take my place." There was a sharp intake of breath. "She asked you to what?" I explained the full situation, including the specific request that I not attend my own sister's wedding and instead participate via video call. "Oh, Bella," my mother said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "I had no idea. Emma made it sound like you were just being difficult about the guest list." "I'm not being difficult, Mom. I'm setting boundaries." Emma made a choice about whose presence she valued more at her wedding. I made a choice about how much I was willing to spend on a wedding where my attendance was considered optional. My father's call came 2 days later. Unlike my mother, he got straight to the point. "Isabella, I understand you're upset with your sister, but don't you think you're being a bit vindictive with these changes?" Vindictive deed. Downgrading the entire wedding because of a disagreement about the guest list seems disproportionate. I took a deep breath before responding. "Dad, Emma didn't ask me to compromise on the guest list. She didn't ask me to find a way to include Jessica in addition to the planned attendees. She asked me to give up my place at the wedding I funded so her friend could go instead. Would you consider that a disagreement about the guest list? When you put it like that, that's the only way to put it because that's what happened." My father was quiet for a moment. "Your mother and I raised you girls to take care of each other. And I have taken care of Emma, Dad. I've helped her financially more times than I can count. I planned and funded her dream wedding, but taking care of someone doesn't mean accepting unlimited disrespect. So you're punishing her by ruining her wedding." "I'm not ruining her wedding. She's still getting married in Tokyo just like she wanted. The ceremony will still be beautiful, the celebration will still be meaningful. It's just not going to be the ultra-luxury experience I originally planned when I thought my presence would be valued." The most difficult call came from Marcus himself. "Isabella, I need you to know that I never agreed with Emma's decision about Jessica. I told her it was wrong to ask you to give up your place, especially after everything you've done for us." I appreciated his honesty. "Then why didn't you stop it?" "I tried, but Emma was convinced that you'd understand that you'd want to help Jessica. She kept saying you were successful enough that missing one wedding wouldn't really matter to you." "It matters to me, Marcus. I know that now. I can see how much it matters, and I'm sorry. Is there any way to fix this?" I considered his question carefully. "Marcus, do you want me at your wedding?" "Of course I do. You're Emma's sister, and you've been incredibly generous to us." "Then you need to uninvite Jessica and ask me to come back." "Emma would never agree to that now. She's already told Jessica she can come already committed to including her." "Then you have your answer. Emma made a choice about who she wanted at her wedding more. I'm just responding to that choice." The final call came from Jessica herself 3 days before the scheduled departure. "Isabella, I think we need to talk." I was surprised to hear from her directly. "What about Jessica?" "I know you're upset about the wedding situation, and I want you to know that I never asked Emma to uninvite you. The idea of me going instead of you, that wasn't something I suggested. But you accepted when she offered." Yes, I did accept, but I didn't realize how much it would hurt you." I waited for her to continue. "The thing is, Isabella, opportunities like this don't come along for people like me. I've never had family who could afford to give me amazing experiences. I've never traveled internationally. This really is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. And you think that justifies taking my place at my sister's wedding? I think it justifies accepting an opportunity when it's offered," Jessica said defensively. "You can afford to go to Japan anytime you want. You can afford to have your own amazing experiences. This is my only chance." "Jessica, do you understand that I spent $47,000 planning this wedding? I know it was expensive, but do you understand that I worked extra hours for months to save that money? That I made sacrifices in my own life to create this experience for my sister? Look, I appreciate what you did, but you chose to spend that money. Nobody forced you to plan such an elaborate wedding." Her casual dismissal of my sacrifice crystallized something for me. You're right, Jessica. I did choose to spend that money, and now I'm choosing how to spend the rest of it. What do you mean? I mean, the wedding you're attending won't be quite the luxury experience you were probably expecting, but I'm sure you'll make the best of it. I didn't hear from anyone in my family for the 3 days leading up to their departure. I assumed they were dealing with their own travel preparations and coming to terms with the modified arrangements. On the day of their flight, I was in a meeting when my phone started buzzing with text messages. The first was from Emma. Bella, we're at the airport, and there seems to be some confusion about our reservations. They're saying we have economy seats, not business class. Can you call the airline? I finished my meeting before responding. No confusion, those are your correct reservations. My phone immediately rang. Bella, what do you mean these are our correct reservations? Emma's voice was strained. We can't sit in economy for 14 hours. Jessica gets motion sick, and Marcus needs the extra space because of his back injury. Emma, economy is what the current budget allows for. But you originally booked business class. I originally planned to attend the wedding. When that changed, I adjusted the budget accordingly. I could hear muffled conversation in the background, then Jessica's voice came on the line. Isabella, this is completely unreasonable. You can't just change people's flights without telling them. I can when I'm the one paying for the flights, I replied calmly. We had expectations based on what Emma told us. Then perhaps you should have checked with me before forming those expectations. The next series of messages came after they landed in Tokyo. Marcus. Isabella. I don't know if Emma told you, but we're not at the hotel we expected. The address they gave us led to a business hotel in an industrial area. Is this correct? Me. Yes, that's correct. Emma. Bella, this hotel is nothing like what you showed me in the planning materials. The rooms are tiny, and there's no view of the city. How are we supposed to take wedding photos here? Me, you'll have to be creative with your photography. Jessica, this is a disaster. The hotel doesn't even have a proper spa or restaurant. How are we supposed to prepare for the wedding? I didn't respond to Jessica's message. The complaints continued throughout their stay as each modified arrangement was discovered. The simplified temple ceremony without elaborate decorations. The group dinner at a standard restaurant instead of the exclusive kaiseki experience. The basic photography package that included significantly fewer shots and no videography. But the message that gave me the most satisfaction came on their third day in Tokyo from Emma. Bella, I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I need to apologize. I realize now how unfair I was to you. Seeing what this trip was supposed to be, understanding how much thought and money you put into creating something special for me. I'm so sorry I took it for granted. I'm sorry I chose Jessica over you. I was wrong. I waited a day before responding. I appreciate your apology, Emma. I hope you're still enjoying your time in Tokyo. I am, but it's not the same without you here. And honestly, Jessica has been complaining about everything constantly. I'm starting to see her in a different light. That last part didn't surprise me. Jessica's true nature was bound to show itself under the stress of unmet expectations. 2 weeks after Emma's wedding, I boarded my own flight to Tokyo. This time, I was in first class sipping champagne as the plane lifted off from San Francisco. My month in Japan was everything I had dreamed of, and more. I stayed at traditional ryokans in Kyoto, where I learned calligraphy from a master artist and participated in authentic tea ceremonies. I hiked ancient pilgrimage routes in the mountains, soaked in natural hot springs under star-filled skies, and ate at hole-in-the-wall restaurants that had been family-run for generations. In Tokyo, I took private cooking classes with renowned chefs, attended exclusive cultural performances, and explored neighborhoods that most tourists never see. I documented my journey through photography and journaling, creating a record of experiences that were entirely my own. The most meaningful part of the trip came during my second week in Kyoto, when I met an elderly woman named Sato-san, who taught traditional textile arts. As we worked together on a silk weaving project, she shared stories about her own family relationships and the importance of setting boundaries with loved ones. In Japan, we have a saying, she told me in careful English, The nail that sticks out gets hammered down. But sometimes being true to yourself means being willing to stick out. Her words resonated deeply with me. For years, I had tried to smooth over family conflicts by being accommodating, by giving more, by accepting less. But that approach had only taught my family to take my generosity for granted. I posted sparingly on social media during my trip, but the few photos I shared made it clear I was having an extraordinary experience. Sunset over Mount Fuji from a private viewing spot. A traditional kaseki meal prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. A private meditation session with monks at a temple that rarely accepted visitors. When I returned from Japan, I found several messages waiting for me. Emma had called multiple times, her voicemails growing increasingly emotional. "Bella, please call me back. I know I messed up badly and I want to make things right. I saw your photos from Japan. It looks like you had an incredible trip. I wish we could have shared those experiences together." I ended my friendship with Jessica. You were right about her. She showed her true colors during the wedding trip, and I finally saw what you'd been seeing all along. When I finally called Emma back, she broke down crying immediately. "Bella, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix what I did to you." "You can't fix it, Emma," I said gently. "But you can learn from it." "I will. I promise I will." We talked for hours that day, working through years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. Emma finally understood the full impact of her actions, not just the wedding situation, but the pattern of taking my support for granted while prioritizing others' needs over mine. "I never realized how much I'd been leaning on you," she admitted. "Every time I had a problem, you were always there to fix it. I started seeing that as normal instead of recognizing it as the incredible gift it was." The most important conversation came when Emma asked about Jessica's behavior during the trip. She complained about everything, Bella. The hotel, the food, the transportation. Nothing was good enough for her. And when other guests at the hotel found out she was attending a wedding she hadn't paid for, she actually told them she deserved it more than the original guest because of her life circumstances. I wasn't surprised, but I was glad Emma had finally seen it for herself. "The worst part," Emma continued, "was when she suggested we should ask you to upgrade the trip midway through. She said you were being petty and vindictive, and that if you really cared about family, you'd want us to have the best experience possible regardless of the drama." "What did you say to that?" I told her she had no right to comment on my relationship with my sister, especially since she was only there because of my mistake in the first place. That's when she showed her true colors, completely screaming at me about how I was ungrateful and how she was the only real friend I had. Emma paused, then added quietly, "That's when I realized she'd never been my friend at all. She'd been waiting for opportunities to benefit from my family connections, and I'd been too naive to see it. The road to rebuilding our relationship wasn't easy or quick. Emma had to learn to see me as a person with my own needs and feelings, not just a resource to be tapped when problems arose. I had to learn to communicate my boundaries clearly instead of building up resentment silently. We started small coffee dates where we talked about our lives without any requests for help or advice. Emma began asking about my work, my interests, my travel plans. For the first time in years, our conversations weren't centered around her problems or my solutions. 6 months after the Tokyo wedding, Emma and Marcus invited me to dinner at their apartment. Emma had cooked the meal herself, a Japanese-inspired menu, using techniques she'd researched after her trip. "I know this can't make up for what happened," she said as she served the miso soup she'd made from scratch. "But I wanted to show you that I'm learning to value the experiences you tried to give me." The meal was delicious, but more importantly, it was thoughtful. Emma had put effort into understanding and honoring the culture she'd experienced, rather than just consuming it as a tourist. During dinner, Marcus shared his perspective on the whole situation. "Isabella, I need you to know that the wedding felt incomplete without you there. Every special moment, every beautiful sight, Emma and I both kept thinking about how you should have been experiencing it with us. The irony," Emma added, "is that having Jessica there made me miss you even more. She was so focused on getting the perfect Instagram shots and complaining about what wasn't luxurious enough that she completely missed the meaning of what we were doing. A year after the Tokyo incident, our family dynamic had fundamentally shifted for the better. Emma had learned to be financially independent, building her design business into a sustainable venture without constant bailouts. She still occasionally asked for advice, but she also offered support when I needed it. My parents, who had initially been confused by the whole situation, came to understand the importance of what had happened. My mother later told me, "Watching Emma learn to appreciate what you'd always given her helped us realize we'd been taking you for granted too." The most significant change was in how our family handled conflicts. Instead of expecting me to always be the accommodating one, everyone learned to communicate more directly and consider each other's perspectives before making decisions. Emma and Marcus celebrated their first anniversary with a small dinner party at their home, inviting only people who had genuinely supported their relationship. As Emma gave a toast that evening, she said something that meant more to me than any apology. To Isabella, who taught me that love isn't just about grand gestures, it's about showing up consistently, supporting without judgment, and sometimes loving someone enough to let them face the consequences of their choices. The Tokyo situation taught me as much about myself as it did about my family. I learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary for healthy relationships. I learned that my worth wasn't determined by how much I could give or sacrifice for others. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's poor behavior, even when that someone is family. I continued traveling solo, discovering that I genuinely enjoyed the independence and self-discovery that came with exploring the world on my own terms. I took trips to Morocco, Iceland, and New Zealand adventures that were entirely mine-planned according to my interests and timeline, but I also learned to include my family in my life in healthier ways. When Emma expressed genuine interest in travel photography, I invited her on a weekend trip to Yosemite, where we could both pursue our interests together. When my parents wanted to plan their own international trip, I offered advice and recommendations without taking over the entire planning process. If you're reading this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family relationships, here's what I learned. Setting boundaries isn't punishment, it's self-preservation. When someone consistently takes advantage of your generosity, refusing to continue enabling that behavior isn't vindictive, it's necessary. Your presence and participation have value. Don't let anyone convince you that your role in important events is expendable just because you're successful or capable. Actions have consequences, even within families. Sometimes people need to experience the full impact of their choices to understand how those choices affect others. Change is possible, but it requires accountability. Emma was able to learn and grow from this experience because she eventually took responsibility for her actions, rather than just making excuses. You can love your family and still require them to treat you with respect. These aren't mutually exclusive concepts. The Tokyo wedding that I never attended became a turning point that strengthened our family relationships in ways that the original luxury experience never could have. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the opportunity to face the real consequences of their choices. 2 years later, Emma and Marcus are planning to renew their vows for their third anniversary, a small, intimate ceremony in our parents' backyard. When Emma asked me to help plan it, I said yes, but this time with clear expectations about guest lists, budgets, and my role in the celebration. "I want you there more than anyone," Emma told me when we started planning. "Not because of what you can provide, but because you're my sister and I love you." That simple statement meant more to me than all the elaborate thank yous or expensive gestures in the world. It represented a fundamental shift in how Emma viewed our relationship from transactional to genuinely familial. The vow renewal will be beautiful, meaningful, and completely drama-free. Jessica, unsurprisingly, is not invited. Emma learned her lesson about prioritizing fair-weather friends over family who truly support her. As for me, I'm in a good place. I have healthy boundaries with my family, a successful career I'm passionate about, and the confidence to prioritize my own needs alongside my desire to help others. I've learned that being a good sister doesn't mean being a doormat, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach someone to value what they have. If my story resonates with you, remember, you deserve to be treated with respect by the people you love. Don't be afraid to require that respect, even if it means making difficult choices. Your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to sacrifice, it's inherent in who you are. Sometimes you have to be willing to miss the wedding to save the relationship. And sometimes that's exactly what everyone needs to learn how to love each other better. Story 2. In order to manage my savings account, my parents surreptitiously placed tracking software on my computer. I had saved $250,000 for a house for 5 years, but they took it away. My father sarcastically said, "Thanks for your naivete," when I found out. Your brother now has a wonderful future thanks to your money. The money they took was truly so much that I couldn't help but chuckle. I appreciate you being with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you're enjoying your day. If you could let me know in the comments the city or nation you're viewing from and what time it is there, that would be greatly appreciated. Let's start our story together now. Old paperbacks and the subtle metallic smell of late-night coffee were the normal scents of my tiny flat, which was cozy but a little boring. It had served as the background for a single, unrelenting concentration on creating a future for 10 years. A continuously increasing amount in my online savings account represented that future, $250,000. I had cobbled together $250,000, penny by penny, one tough decision at a time. I've had lunch with every brown bag. My coworkers left while Alan ate at my desk. Each pair of fading sneakers was worn. Every attractive holiday was postponed for another season. Every more freelancing job crammed into already full weekends. That was the sum of it all. Money wasn't the only thing involved. It was the outward expression of my independent self-control and quiet drive. It was the down payment for a modest area of grass and a plain, solid home. Late at night, I dreamed of a spot where I could finally establish roots that were genuinely mine while I browsed through internet listings. Simply put, it was my independence. With all due respect, my folks were always full of uninvited financial advice. It was hardly the tactful advice of an experienced investor. It was a persistent, vigilant criticism that was hardly disguised as worry. "Michael, are you certain that your savings account is the best option for your finances on our required Sunday night calls?" my mother would inquire. Her voice was filled with that certain type of parental nervousness that usually sounded more like condemnation. "You know, real estate prices are always rising along with inflation. Perhaps you ought to think about using part of that money, maybe assisting David in starting his business." David, my younger brother. The son looked to be the center of the family's universe. His needs came first, his potential was limitless, and every move he made was a reason for celebration and most of the time, money. Every family member and acquaintance was informed that paying for college needed a large parental sacrifice. David had a fantastic, ill-defined company concept that promised to disrupt something more than just his unavoidable game-changing success. My own modest accomplishments include getting a steady engineering career, accumulating money gradually, and graduating from college debt-free thanks to scholarships and part-time work. These received a nod, a dismissive, "That's nice, Michael," before the topic of David's most recent grant application or networking opportunity often came up again. My involvement was obvious, the calm, reliable one. The support system is supposed to help without expecting credit, or if possible help in return. Unaware that they viewed me as nothing more than raw disposable material, I was the solid, unseen foundation upon which they constructed. There was a huge reverberating cavern in my blind area. I honestly thought that their subtly manipulative behavior, their persistent advice, and their blatant partiality for David were only uncomfortable displays of affection and inept attempts to mentor their reserved son. I confused their deep-rooted need for control with sincere concern. They count on my steadfast support for a positive family unity paradigm. I grew up in their home on Maple Lane, which was a temple to manufactured perfection. The yard was always well kept. The throw pillows were perfectly lush. The mantelpiece's carefully placed family portraits highlight significant occasions. I could sense the performance seething under the surface, even as a toddler. In an almost violent attempt to cover up any less-than-ideal aroma, the air inside was always slightly scented with Mother's trademark cloying flowery air freshener. Any talk that strayed into awkward terrain might be cut off by my father's deep, resonant growl, returning everyone to safe, unimportant subjects, or of course David's most recent success. The savings account itself was a holdover from a bygone era, or maybe it was evidence of my immaturity. Long after I had moved out, it was still connected to my parents' address on paper statements that I had opened in high school. I never got around to updating it. It was simply one of those administrative issues. More importantly, years ago, I had provided them with the login credentials for the internet. Now I could hardly recall why. Perhaps they had merely insisted on helping me set up internet connection, and I had complied blindly believing them. Or perhaps they wanted to send a tiny amount for a trifling or shared charge. It was an isolated incident, a brief moment of parental support or convenience that I never imagined might be turned into a weapon. It felt normal, the family said. Did they not? Did my family not share the first sign? It was so faint that it resembled a ghost. My work laptop, a powerful, relatively new computer that I used every day, started to act slow. It froze. Files took excruciatingly long seconds to access web pages and spun endlessly before opening. It was like pulling a large object through muck. I tried all I knew how to do, including running antivirus scans, deleting outdated apps, and optimizing storage, but to no avail. The problems with performance continued. A bothersome, ongoing hindrance to my output. I was unable to touch it, and it felt like a little persistent itch. I wrote off a small annoyance as a hardware malfunction. The questions followed, more intrusive, sharper, and presented with the same cheesy veneer of worry. Michael, do you still intend to buy the property next year? You know prices are really outrageous right now. Do you have complete confidence that your savings are keeping up? Perhaps you ought to rethink your approach. The kind yet inquisitive tone of my mother's voice on the phone pricked my skin like small needles. During such calls, I would get a hazy, uneasy sensation in my stomach, as if I were being closely watched, and my intentions were somehow vulnerable to criticism and public scrutiny. I attempt to dismiss it by attributing it to my personal anxiety over the significant purchase one evening and resolving the persistent computer lag. I navigated through the list of active processes in the task manager, which was primarily composed of well-known system activities or programs. A name I didn't recognize appeared. At first sight, it appeared harmless. A series of words that seemed technical. A cautious, brief search on a backup device produced terrifying findings. This specific process name or variants on it were frequently linked to software for monitoring and remote access, software that can access files, record keystrokes, take screenshots, and even turn on cameras and microphones. My blood froze. Why is that on my laptop at work? Had I clicked on an untrustworthy link? Did you accidentally download something? A nauseating idea. Dark tendrils that were both pernicious and extremely unnerving started to emerge from the corners of my mind. Not them, please. They couldn't be. The folks who brought me up. My folks. However, I had granted them access years prior, and the questions and time were different. It came together to form a terrifying prospect that I wished with all my might to deny. Later that evening, I could feel my hands shaking as I made my way to my online banking login. The fear that was growing inside of me was mirrored by the cursor's seeming creep across the screen. The statistics I had been seeing rise for 10 years were loaded in the familiar arrangement. I expected to see the strong six-figure number when I looked at the primary balance. It was absent. It was a tiny sum, not enough to pay the rent for a month. I let out a choking sound. I frantically scrolled through the transaction history after clicking onto it. Gasps of breath came out of me, and there it was, unmistakable and striking. Just last Tuesday, there was a single significant outbound transfer, $250 and $1,000. It seemed like the world was tilting on its axis. My chest constricted. Physically, not figuratively, as though a crushing weight had been placed on my sternum. Every breath was a frantic, agonizing struggle, like if someone had wrapped barbed wire across my lungs. This was not feasible. It must have been an error. A hack and error. Not them, not my folks, not my relatives. 10 years of my life were symbolized by that sum of money. My future. My vision of a secure, self-sufficient area. It had vanished. Disappeared. The next afternoon, I took a car to their home on Maple Lane. My mind was racing as I tried to imagine a different situation, but the drive was a haze. I was met by the flawless facade. The rose plants were carefully trimmed. The driveway was just sealed. The fake, overpowering smell of Mother's flower spray filled the air within. It now feels more like a stifling gas than a nice scent. David appeared completely unburdened as he tapped away on his tablet, while sprawled out on the immaculate white sofa. Opposite me sat my parents. As they took in my face, their first looks of mild astonishment at my unexpected presence hardened into cautious apprehension. I didn't make an effort to be kind. I spoke in a strained, weak voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. The fear and incredulity shook the words to their core. My $250,000 in savings. It's gone. Moved out. In a well-practiced show of astonishment, Mother's hand sprang to her lips. How utterly horrible, Michael. Have you been compromised? Did you accidentally click on something? With his brow wrinkled in a convincing display of concern, Father leaned forward from his recliner. Son, are you really certain? Are you appropriately interpreting the statement, online banking may be complex? I took out my phone and fumbled with my trembling fingers to find the transaction log. In my hand, the screen felt slippery. I pushed it in their direction, the indisputable proof shining brightly. Here it is. One transfer, $250,000, was deposited into an account last Tuesday. Their eyes scoured the television, normally their mother's face, but I don't know it. So meticulously put up, she was clearly pale under makeup. The veneer of worry lifted, revealing something harder beneath her, and Father's jaw hardened. The show started to fall apart, exposing the calculating, frigid core underneath. Well, Michael, said the father, his tone shedding the pretended pity and adopting that well-known commanding tone that would not back down. We helped a family member transfer, facilitated for the family. My ribs were pounded by my heart. Without my consent, it is facilitated by a frenetic drumming on my bones. It's money from my house. A decade of saving. Disappeared in a flash. How were you able to? Mother interrupted, raising her voice in abrupt acerbic outrage. Michael, don't be so theatrical. The money belongs to the family. What belongs to me belongs to you, and what belongs to you belongs to the family. When you were young, we assisted you. We stood by you. We made an investment in you. Invested, I said the word, which seemed like a betrayal in and of itself. My down payment was stolen by you. My future was stolen by you. Then Father rose to his full height, his voice resonating with a little boom that filled the room. With a hint of bewilderment on his face, David eventually raised his head from his iPad. Noticing the change in the atmosphere, the term stole is absurd. We required it. In order to ensure its survival, David's startup required a last substantial investment. His future is at stake here. The success of our family. My future. Was that cash? I raised my voice now? Rumble in agony. A developing chilly rage and disbelief. All of my hard-earned money was stolen by you. Everything for which I made sacrifices. A thin, self-satisfied, and blatantly malicious smile curved Father's lips. His steely, triumphant gaze greeted me. I will never forget this moment, which marked the end of a lifetime of covert rejections and overt favoritism. His voice reverted to a low, cutting tone that was brimming with scorn as he drew slightly closer. I appreciate your gullibility, Michael. Your brother now has a wonderful future thanks to your money. Leveraging assets for the greater good is something that some of us are aware of. I was broken, but not in the way they had anticipated. Pain was no longer the only thing. It was a strange, almost disinterested acknowledgement of the extraordinary haughtiness and the whole and total ignorance of the truth of the situation they had brought about. I felt an odd pressure behind my eyes and in my chest. I let out a choked sound. It wasn't a cry. The laugh was just getting started. A chuckle that came from my own throat was dark, bitter, and completely confused. Their expressions were a mix of bewilderment and offense as they gazed at me. My father's arrogant expression wavered and was replaced by annoyance. "What are you laughing at, for heaven's sake?" With her eyes narrowed into suspicious slits, Mother demanded. David appeared clearly uneasy. He could feel the scene was getting out of control. It was a bizarre wave of dark amusement that was solidifying in my belly, and I was unable to stop it. The laughing was unsteady, incredulous, and bordering on insane. "Do you believe that you stole my future?" With each syllable, my voice grew firmer despite its shaking. "Do you believe you have won? Do you believe you fooled me?" Slowly, the chuckle faded into a grim, unblinking smile that didn't belong on my face, and I shook my head. "You don't know. The cash you stole, I wasn't the only one with savings. No more. You simply sealed your own doom by accepting it." The decisive turning point came at that very time. The startle, the unadulterated agony, the sensation of being completely exposed. I wasn't broken by it. It cleansed me, destroying what remains of naive optimism and unthinking loyalty. It created something hard and fresh. In the furnace of treachery, devastation was replaced by cold focus and resolve. However, this was no longer just about getting money back. It included it. Justice was at stake, and the rot underneath the flawless, polished exterior had to be revealed. They gave a presentation to the world about shielding me from the horrifying truth of their potential. That day, I left their home burning with a clear, cool fire, rather than broken. A nauseating reminder of the artificiality I was leaving behind. The overpowering flowery scent of the air freshener stuck to my clothes. I returned to my solitary, peaceful flat by car. The quiet that was intensifying the jumbled ideas in my mind couldn't last. Not when that program may still be observing and lurking. I cleaned my laptop. Scrubbing away years' worth of files, memories, and digital fingerprints was a necessary but nearly brutal act that made sure no more information could be compromised. I then went to Emma's after packing a little suitcase. In an area of the city distant from the oppressive, flawless sameness of bucolic Maple Lane, Emma lived simply and purposefully. Her apartment complex was older, eccentric, and full of personality. After opening the door and taking one glance at my shocked, pale eyes, she drew me into a wordless, furious hug. Her apartment had a distinct fragrance, vintage paperbacks. The coffee is brewing fresh, something earthy and clean that spoke of real life, not of a manufactured kind. Presentation. It had a secure scent. The narrative came out of me slowly at first, then in a torrent as the words caught in my throat. Father's nasty, mocking claim, the software discovery, the disappearing money, and the strange, nearly uncontrollable laughing that ensued. Emma patiently listened, her face changing from worry to incredulity to a silent, smoldering rage that mirrored mine. "Oh, Mike," she said in a steady, quiet voice. "I was constantly aware of a problem with them. The David Show's treatment of you. However, this is quite different. Her experience with cybersecurity was more than simply a job. I was completely unfamiliar with this intense desire and natural grasp of the digital world." She was instantly aware of the consequences of tracking software, remote access screen grabs, and keyloggers. With her fingers already gliding over the keyboard of her own spotless computer, she said, "Seeing what you're doing isn't enough. Gaining access to accounts, files, and private information is the goal, particularly if you use the computer for banking or other private purposes." With the help of Emma's limitless supply of strong coffee and adrenaline, we began digging and worked late into the night, not on my erased computer, but I could lawfully get old bank statements, online account logs that showed when I accessed them, and anything else that existed before the wipe. Emma concentrated on tracking down the transfer of $250,000. After going to a domestic account, it broke up in a matter of hours and spread out into a network of intricate quick transactions involving a number of shell corporations and accounts with names that seemed like generic corporations. It wasn't going straight to a well-known vendor David's business, or even a straightforward investment fund. This was money laundering done correctly. This went beyond financially abusive parents taking money from a son to support a preferred sibling. This was a component of a significantly more extensive and intricate criminal scheme. My parents were more than simply cunning and self-centered. They operated a sophisticated financial fraud network as professional criminals. The money they stole from me was only a minor part of their bigger plan, which was either utilized to finance their illegal operations or laundered via several accounts. The insight felt like a heavy cold stone sinking into my stomach. Their meticulously manicured look, their fixation on appearances, and their unrelenting promotion of David's achievement. Family dysfunction wasn't the only bothersome aspect about it. It was a well-planned cover for something far more sinister and perilous. It was crushed under its weight. Emma, however, discovered something else. Through some digital magic, she was able to get something that was directly related to the tracking software data. Records indicating which files they remotely accessed on my PC after downloading the program were not entirely clear to me. My identity verification files, tax returns, and copies of previous loan applications. I have digital copies of my Social Security card and driver's license saved. My money wasn't the only thing they were taking. My identity was being aggressively used by them. In order to support their fraud network, they surreptitiously placed tracking software on my accounts and stole my personal information. Creating accounts with banks in my name, submitting a credit application, perhaps signing papers. Leaving a trail that, should their activities be uncovered, may lead back to me. The nausea came back more worse. They had harmed me more than just monetarily and emotionally. Without my knowledge or cooperation, they were deliberately attempting to set me up to be held legally responsible for their crimes. They did more than simply embezzle my money. Thick with terror, I stuttered out the words. My name was stolen. They were attempting to blame me. In this growing nightmare, the brother David continued to be a cruel supporting character. Was he involved? Emma's examination of the transaction flows only linked him to getting a sizable sum of money from our parents, not to the intricate money laundering or the shell corporations. He appeared to be either consciously ignorant, refusing to see the guy behind the curtain as long as the money continued to flow, or really unaware, enjoying the advantages of his favored status without having to ask awkward questions. As a result, he became a key privileged beneficiary of their vast crime, rather than a knowing co-conspirator in the most serious deception. Ambition and the story our parents had taught him all his life had blinded him. But when the whole truth was revealed, I knew with a cold certainty that was ingrained in my bones that he would support the parents. The integrity of their story was crucial to his reputation and his meticulously crafted facade of success, which was based on their wealth. Equipped with the quickly mounting evidence, the indisputable logs demonstrating the installation of the tracking software and remote access, the intricate transaction trails that unmistakably linked the shell companies and their fraudulent network, and the evidence of identity theft verified by my documents, we started to realize the scope of their operation. There were hundreds of transactions, not just dozens, which might have cost millions of dollars, and horribly affected many actual people, including elderly persons who were the targets of fraudulent investment schemes, small businesses that were duped into making false deals, and families who had their assets stolen. My folks. Predators who preyed on the weak to finance their opulent lifestyle, and David's Golden Road served as the cornerstones of the Maple Lane community facade. This is when the phony money twist really took hold, explaining the strange, almost hysterical, almost comical laughing that they had back at home, along with the lingering uneasiness from the first computer malfunctions and strange queries from their parents before the $250,000 disappeared. I had followed my instincts, a hunch that something wasn't right. It was a move motivated more by vague paranoia than by hard evidence. However, it rescued me weeks before. The account they were monitoring, which they believed contained my life savings, was a ruse. I had carefully and discreetly moved all $250,000 of my funds into a new, entirely different account at a different financial institution that they were unaware of. Its balance was smaller and less important. Perhaps a few planned automatic transfers would make it appear active, but less alluring for a full-scale heist. My 10 years of devotion were not what they saw and took that day. Based on the exact dates and quantities Emma was able to track down, they took money that they had just sent through my hacked account. as a quick, covert pause in the intricate international money laundering process of their own fraud network. They believed my huge savings level would help the transaction blend in, so they assumed they were utilizing my account to temporarily cover or clean up their dirty money. They spared my future by snatching it out. The dark, cosmic irony of it all made me laugh almost out loud when they stole their own hot money and left a bright, indisputable digital trail that led directly from their wider fraud network back to them. This trail was specifically connected to an account that was associated with me, the very person whose identity they were stealing at the same time. They believed they could pick my pocket with impunity because they were so cunning and untouchable. However, they had unintentionally stepped into a trap that I had constructed, supplying the exact, indisputable piece of proof that would destroy everything they had based on falsehoods. Their own trap was stolen. I reiterated to Emma the discovery, which was both deeply sinisterly fulfilling and scary in its ramifications. The choice was now not only obvious, but also necessary. I was not capable of managing this on my own, or limiting it to family matters. The deception was too widespread, there were too many possible victims, and I was legally exposed for the identity theft. Law enforcement was necessary. Justice was what we needed. Not only for myself, but for all the other people they had hurt. Together with Emma, we worked painstakingly to gather our evidence into a comprehensive chronological case file that included IP addresses, transaction logs, screenshots of the program interface that were accidentally taken, and links between fraudulent conduct and tracking software access. Shell company names, leads on possible victims connected to the scamming tendencies seen in public data. I first contacted an impartial third party who verified the reliability and authenticity of our evidence, and we had a private consultation with the lawyer. To make sure I wasn't unintentionally implicated because of the identity theft, she gave us advice on how to contact the authorities. The FBI was the right agency because of the size of the financial network, which probably crossed state boundaries. The next days were a haze of meetings retelling the agonizing tale repeatedly and giving the financial and technological proof. The agents were cautious at first, as they should be, but they moved deliberately and methodically as I described the family relationships and the origins of the hacked account, and Emma lay out the complex digital breadcrumbs. Professional indifference gave way to deadly earnestness on their faces. They noticed the network. They witnessed the washing. They saw the bold identity theft. They witnessed the extent of the treachery. They saw the possibility of many casualties. The dramatic courtroom clash you see in movies wasn't the climax. It was justice's icy, premeditated coming. The agents built their case and obtained warrants in a timely and stealthy manner. They scheduled the exposure for a Tuesday morning when both of my parents would be at the unremarkable suburban office building that they utilized as a respectable front for a portion of their business. Emma and I were waiting close, but I wasn't there when the arrests really happened. My chest felt like a real wire pulling taut. The air was thin and difficult to breathe. I saw the situation playing out, the ordinary office setting, the surprise knock on the door, the surprising appearance of federal officials wearing badges, the proper reading. The case papers and Emma's connections eventually provided me with information about their early haughtiness and how their carefully constructed facade of respectable business people abruptly crumbled in the face of government inquiry. The father's face apparently became ash white just before, yet it was probably calm and assured. The mother's well-maintained poise fell apart entirely, the sound of handcuffs snapping into place, harsh and definitive, reverberating in the abrupt, astonished hush, her voice increasing her desperate, senseless protestations, shifting responsibility wildly. Using the hijacked accounts, they first tried to deny everything, then they tried to negotiate, and then, in a horrible move, they sought to place part of the blame on me. A last-ditch, manipulative attempt, motivated by their refusal to take accountability. However, there is proof, the indisputable trail that their own hot money went straight through my account. The logs from the spying program that was set up on my PC. It was overwhelming to see the documents that were falsified using my identity. Unquestionable. There was a maelstrom in the immediate aftermath. The arrests news. As the scope of the financial fraud network became clear, the initial police blotter item swiftly escalated. My parents' meticulously crafted public persona was picked up by local and even national news organizations. The ideal family on Maple Lane fell apart, leaving the fragments all over the place. The social consequences followed, causing a second wave of suffering and phone calls from perplexed family members. While some of them were supportive, many were swayed by years of believing the rumors my parents were spreading across the neighborhood. And my brother David, who had personally profited from their crimes, responded to me with rage, self-serving denial, and wrath, rather than reflection guilt or empathy for the victims. With a fury, he resorted to social media to make nasty false claims out of sheer spite, portraying a stable, respected family that had been shattered by a disturbed, resentful, and envious son. He posted flimsy accusations, misrepresented the truth, and used the very words our parents had taught him all his life, that I was somehow less worthy, less competent, and now deliberately malevolent. He's attempting to ruin us. In an attempt to rally their surviving supporters, he railed online, adding fuel to the public's fire. His total absorption into the poisonous dynamics of the family and his resolve to defend his privileged position at all costs were confirmed by this painful but ultimately illuminating final act of treachery. Hearings, procedural stages, and ultimately trial preparation or plea talks form the foundation of the legal process, which is a drawn-out and emotionally taxing time. My parents seemed thin and elderly after taking off their public persona and confronting the harsh realities of the legal system. They continued to try to minimize their role or defend their conduct, displaying no public contrition. However, the proof that Emma and I had meticulously gathered stood up. My actual $250,000 in savings is still in the safe account I transferred it to unaltered. Among the assets connected to the fraud case was the hot money they had stolen and transferred through my account. Supplying documents and lucid testimony while collaborating closely with my attorney and the authorities. In order to ensure that my name was exempt from any potential culpability related to the identity theft and the fraud network, they attempted to blame me, for I was able to effectively negotiate the legal difficulties. Disentangling myself from the poisonous criminal web they had spun using my life as a thread was a long and tedious task. Regaining my reputation was a purposeful, continuous effort, rather than a sudden, spectacular declaration. Completely assisting law enforcement, coolly correcting false information when questioned, and ultimately choosing to speak the truth. Months turned into a year so I could take charge of my own story. It was the end of the judicial process. Given the scope and consequences of their vast financial crimes, my parents received lengthy prison terms. The cold legal type of justice was administered. There was no moment of reconciliation, no dramatic courtroom apology, nothing that would give decades of dysfunction and treachery a tidy Hollywood conclusion. Only the grim announcement of the consequences. The last unambiguous legal line established between us. Emma was a constant, a loyal friend who had grown to be more like family to me than my own family ever was. Not everything we spoke was about the past. We discussed our lives' aspirations and common experiences. Her presence served as a constant, silent solace and a physical reminder of what it was like to have a real, healthy connection. Ultimately, purchasing my home was the most important step in my own recovery process. Although I had saved for it throughout that lost decade, it wasn't the first dream I had, but it was mine. I recall how weighty the key felt in my hand. When I opened the front door for the first time by myself, I heard the lock click softly. The home was deserted. There is a minor echo in the rooms, an empty canvas awaiting filling. It didn't feel lonely, though. It seemed so full of potential, of security and tranquility. The fragrance of clean, fresh paint and the promise of a future I would construct on firm footing were all that was present, along with the absence of cloying artificial odors and suffocating family portraits on the walls. I had my own area, a physical border that is safe and secure. I have endured unspeakable suffering and treachery to prove to myself that the wounds from the betrayal still there. A portion of me is probably going to be cautious all the time. Verify the details again at all times. Always have a bit less faith in others. The suffering of grief. The death of the family I believed to be mine. Even though that family was founded on deceit and manipulation, There is occasionally a dull aching that comes to the surface, especially around holidays, or when I encounter others who appear to have functional family ties. However, it no longer characterizes me. Money was all that the $250,000 were. The liberation, the genuine city, and the hard-won tranquility I discovered were invaluable. The effects of toxic family dynamics are widespread, subtle, and extremely harmful. They distort how you see the world and yourself, undermine your sense of value, and cause you to doubt your own sanity. It's not rude or unkind to set boundaries. It's a crucial act of self-defense and a statement that your health is important. Those who share your bloodline and are meant to love you the most can sometimes be the ones who harm you the most. But the first step to healing and taking back your life is to face the reality, no matter how unpleasant or surprising that may be. It takes a great deal of strength and self-love to stand up for yourself, especially when your own family is actively working to discredit you and bring you down. Truth, self-respect, and the bravery to leave behind what was harming me were the cornerstones of my new life, which I constructed brick by brick with years of sacrifice. Have you ever been forced to choose between keeping up a connection with toxic family members and putting your own health first? How long did it take you to establish a barrier that made all the difference?